Wire is the greatest show ever made. It's my favorite for sure, but also the greatest. It's truly second to none. When I first watched The Wire years ago, it ruined TV for me. It broke my brain that something on the small screen could be this well written, this cohesive, this good. And I expected everything else to be this good as well. And thus far, the closest I got was Better Call Saul. And that didn't beat it out. Hell, on my latest rewatch, I was surprised to realize that season 2 of The Wire is my favorite season of TV ever. And that's really saying something, because I have seen season 1 of Game of Thrones.
Go find the breastplate stretcher! Now!
Game of Thrones might seem like a strange comparison to The Wire, namely, one is goated and one has dragons, but both of their first seasons play out very similarly. Someone is murdered before each pilot episode, kicking off each show's respective plot. Both pilot episodes seamlessly introduce immense casts, setting up complex, character-driven political stories that would increase in scope and complexity as they went along, and then end on a violent note. In each season, a kidnapping escalates a feud into an open war, although the scales and circumstances are different. Both seasons feature emotional deaths of a major character in their final episodes, and those deaths butterfly effect seasons later to the demise of kingdoms, drug and feudal alike. Iconic characters from both shows spit absolute fire, and you guys tell me if these two lines sound similar.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground.
The game is out there, and it's either play or get played.
This is a real screenshot. In the season 1 finale, when Avon first visits the funeral home, he looks out the window and sees this. Simon and Burns are prophets, man. But Thrones parallels aside, these two shows are not the same. Game of Thrones is an anywhere from pretty good to absolute dogshit adaptation of the book series A Song of Ice and Fire. And even though I have Krakatoa levels of smoke for Game of Thrones, I only have a campfire's worth for the first season, and I still consider it a masterpiece. But The Wire? How do I put this? The Wire is closer to A Song of Ice and Fire than it is Game of Thrones. Unlike Game of Thrones, novels adapted into a TV show, The Wire is what happens when writers say, you know what, why can't a TV show be a novel? The Wire is so rich and dense and complex, it's beyond words. 90% of the show is just characters talking, and it's the shit. I've read enough fiction to know that you can't replicate an inner monologue on screen, but the camera work in The Wire, angles, lighting, establishing shots, focus, zooms, cuts, combined with the impeccable subtle acting of the entire cast, it's about as good as it gets for a screen. Forget about not going on your phone. You have to sit down, shut up, and lock in for a full 55 HBO minutes in order to properly digest an episode of the greatest show ever made. And I think that's why, compared to its contemporaries like Breaking Bad or The Sopranos, there's a relatively small amount of content in the YouTube sphere about The Wire. It can be difficult to talk about, as literally every scene is important in developing the characters and or advancing at least one storyline. To paraphrase George R.R. Martin, it's all muscle, no fat, so any thorough analysis has to be as complex as the plot. And on a scale of 1 to 10, The Wire is yes, complex. So for my analysis, I will try to pick out certain themes to highlight. In the process, I will take tangents and comment on the scene or character or whatnot, but I'll also do my best to not make this video an incoherent, rambling mess. So that's just my long-winded way to say welcome to my first video. This is the first installment in my series analyzing The Wire. I thought it fitting to start with what I believe to be the defining theme of the show, corruption. Let's see what The Wire has to say about corruption.
Shining up shit and calling it gold so majors become colonels and mayors become governors.
Thanks, Lieutenant Daniels. That single line makes this entire video redundant, but alas, we push on. In a show where I'd say the city of Baltimore and its institutions are the main character, the corruption of said institutions is not only the primary theme, but it becomes the main storyline. Virtually all characters in a position of authority are self-serving, and those that aren't are either forced out or succumb to institutional forces. After all, we spend 3 seasons following Tommy Littlefinger as he campaigns for a mayoral election with wide-eyed ideals for police reform, only to win the election and immediately sandbag that reform shit to do whatever it takes to get elected governor. This shot, in particular, as a consultant tells Littlefinger he could be running for governor in 2 years, really says it all. You can see the gears turning in his head the moment the mayoral tenure becomes nothing more than a stepping stone for his higher political ambition. And as I watched Littlefinger fuck over the city a few episodes later, this shot is what stuck in my head the most. But I think we're gonna shelve a discussion of Tommy Littlefinger for a later video, a video I very much plan to make in the future. For now, seeing as how it's still the first video, let's start at the very beginning. Rawls.
Put your ass in the chair.
Rawls is the first quote-unquote big boss we meet in The Wire, and he's a standout character off rip. For context, his introduction comes 20 minutes into the first episode. Time spent with McNulty wheeling and dealing in the BPD, stirring up shit that leads to the plot, and Rawls spends the next 5 minutes picking it apart and calling him out. In this scene, we learn the most important things about Rawls. He's a ruthless company man. He hears McNulty talking to a judge about some drug kingpin murdering folks scot-free, and the first thing he does is rip McNulty a new one for going outside the chain of command. And sure, McNulty gets his detail, but Rawls has Santangelo as his mole, so he's got his eyes and ears. And he does not forget. The Rawls-McNulty dynamic is one of my favorite features of all the cop storylines. It's one of the best iterations of two characters with mutual, deep-seated hatred combined with a mutual, begrudging respect. Where else have I seen that? I'm gonna say something that I don't think I've seen written before, but let me know if this is unoriginal. Rawls is what happens when McNulty lusts for power. He doesn't hate McNulty because he's, to quote Rawls, a backstabbing piece of shit. He hates McNulty because he sees himself in McNulty. When those two butt heads in the first season, specifically Rawls wanting to sabotage the Barksdale case, directly and indirectly, McNulty is usually right, and Rawls knows it, and he's pissed. Midway through the season, when the Barksdale case is really taking off with, well, The Wire, Rawls is ready to charge D'Angelo with murders. Murders we learn later he did not commit. McNulty and Kima spend an episode convincing Daniels to fight for the case, and he does.
This is bullshit.
Daniels keeps the case going, so Rawls uses his mole. He tells Santangelo to bring him McNulty, or he'll be the one bending over. And to encourage Santangelo, Rawls makes him solve a murder case. His job, of course, but one that he seems to lack the skill set to do adequately. Rawls, on the other hand, well shit, he's phenomenal at his job. That's why he and McNulty are such a fascinating yin and yang. McNulty is natural police. We're shown this from the first scene and constantly thereafter, and it's confirmed by pretty much every character on the show. We're never told that Rawls is good police, but we're shown it. Toward the end of the first season, Kima goes undercover, and things go poorly in a tense and masterfully edited panic sequence. To start the next episode, this leaves a very chaotic scene, as you'd expect. And who shows up to take charge? Rawls.
Then remove your useless interfering asses from the area.
He quickly pieces together that Weebay and Little Man were on foot, leading to finding DNA and fingerprints. He notices the street signs are flipped, illustrating he has an intimate knowledge of the city he is supposedly working to protect, knowledge that crops up again later in the third season. He tells the DEA agent to go fuck himself, and I think this is the only time in the entire show that the entire BPD was working to the same goal: find the shooters. Finally, Rawls' finest hour is capped off with the unthinkable. He sees McNulty wallowing in guilt and self-pity in the corner, blaming himself for Kima's shooting, and Rawls picks him up. He takes him to the hospital, where they hear the recording of Kima's POV, and McNulty has an involuntary personal protein spill, and Rawls is the one to pick him up, in a way only he can.
Listen to me, you fuck.
After these pleasant words, Rawls goes on to say that Kima's shooting was not his fault. He calls out McNulty's narcissism, which we will get into in a minute, and basically tells him to get over himself.
Believe it or not, everything isn't about you.
To really drive the point home to McNulty, Rawls assures him that if it was his fault, he would be the first to say so because he hates his guts. We'll come back to this scene in a minute, but the point is that Rawls, despite all his flaws, is not the kind of man to kick someone while he's down, even if that someone is McNulty. McNulty, who he hates. McNulty, whose ass he shipped to the boat. And in a broader sense, we learn that Rawls is smart, ruthless, vindictive, and ambitious, all while being incredibly competent. Exactly the kind of man you would expect to get a promotion in between seasons. In Season 2, we first see Colonel Rawls deal with the thorn at his side. Sailor Man McNulty not only fishes out a body, but then spends, by his account, 2 to 3 hours pinning it on Rawls. And I just love his reaction.
I gotta give the son of a bitch some credit for wit on this one.
It's one of those moments where you're really, really pissed, yet somehow you're still more impressed. Oh, and then McNulty later ensures that 13 dead women found in a shipping container are homicide, and in the jurisdiction fight, they get pinned on Rawls. McNulty is very pleased with himself. There are 2 things I want to focus on here. First, the jurisdiction fight. No one wants to eat the 14 homicides. In your standard cop show, murder cases must be solved. Killers must be brought to justice. But in a show as realistic as The Wire, 14 Jane Does simply makes law enforcement supervisors more irritated than usual. And second is that in this situation, Rawls is extra irritated because he's stuck with these 14 red names because of McNulty, who he personally sent off to get seasick. And hey, credit to McNulty, man. He spent hours looking at these maps and charts on the hope that he could pin a single body on Rawls. That's a new tier of pettiness. Now, parallel to McNulty rat-fucking Rawls and his clearance rate, Major Valchek gets his own detail going, and Daniels gets assigned CO and picks McNulty, to which Rawls says,
He quits or he drowns.
And honestly, valid. But as the case progresses, Daniels takes on the 14 murders, which puts Rawls in a position where he has a vested interest in the case's success. And he's also smart enough to know that McNulty being on the case increase its chances for solving the murders. So he relents, illustrating that he is vindictive, yes, but more pragmatic than that. He lets McNulty off the boat, but only so he can bring him the stats. And because McNulty is good police, he does. This push and pull within Rawls comes up again with the Comstat meetings of Season 3. He is truly in his element. It's a showcase of the 2 gay wolves inside of Rawls, his competence and his ambition, and they feed into each other. We watch about a half dozen Comstat meetings throughout the 3rd season, and these meetings tend to play out the same way. Rawls rolls exclusively nat 20s on speech and berates the ever-living shit out of his subordinates. These scenes show that, yes, Rawls is good police. That's why he's able to call out his subordinates. But rather than use that knowledge of what it takes to be good police to, advocate for any kind of reforms that de-incentivize the stats game, or prioritize deeper investigations into violent crimes, or at the very least instruct the officers and detectives under his command on how to do their job more effectively, he just boosts his profile by verbally curb-stomping whoever's at the podium. With one exception, of course, Major Colvin. Midway through the 3rd season, Major Colvin gets a brilliant idea. He's going to give the bosses clean stats. And these stats show a 2% increase in crime. Now to this, Rawls is very reasonable.
Because there isn't going to be a goddamn Western District in 20 years if this shit keeps up.
I find this line read so interesting. For the first time in any of these meetings, Rawls' fury sounds almost righteous, and it's not entirely unjustified. From his perspective, a veteran police commander is saying, yeah, it sucks, crime is up, people are dying, what are you gonna do? I'm purely talking out of my ass, but it's almost like a ghost of a past, more idealistic Rawls burst to the surface, if only for a moment. But of course, we the audience know Colvin is playing a deeper game, a game brought about by another brilliant idea, legalizing drugs. Obviously, this leads to the Hamsterdam storyline of Season 3, and I have to exert some self-control here. This video is about Rawls, and honestly, Hamsterdam is worthy of its own video. So instead, I want to smash cut to the death of Hamsterdam, which starts with a Comstat meeting. because the only other thing I'll say about Hamsterdam is it worked. Yes, that comes with a big, video-worthy asterisk. But to paraphrase Rawls, Colvin dropped West Baltimore's crime rate by 14% in a single swoop. This, of course, is after he told them all about Hamsterdam, and again, Rawls' characterization is on point. Right from the jump, when Colvin corrects himself to take sole responsibility for what he's about to explain, you see Rawls really start to lock in. And Colvin does a good job. He told all the drug dealers to move to the zones where drug enforcement was null, so they did. Sounds pretty reasonable. And I don't know if it's supposed to characterize Rawls as smart or Burrell and Major Reed as idiots, but Rawls is the first to call out the elephant in the room.
Jesus Christ, you nit. Don't you see what he's done? He's legalized drugs.
And that leads directly to the aforementioned death of Hamsterdam. Burrell and Reed are stun-locked on the political consequences, but Rawls is just impressed. As I mentioned earlier, he gives his due credit and even picks up the letters Colvin brought with him. Eventually, they do raid Hamsterdam, and it's a parody. Hell, almost a fourth wall break.
Over the top, gentlemen.
Then, when it's all over, Rawls and Burrell shoot Colvin into the sun. They demote him to lieutenant, force him to retire before he's 30, fuck with his retirement job at Johns Hopkins, and they blackmail him into submission by threatening to give the 13 years and 4 months treatment to all of his men. And you know the worst of it? We were all warned this was gonna happen in the 3rd episode of the season.
I don't even want to think about the worst these motherfuckers can do. You don't either.
Anyway, even though Rawls and Burrell cover Mayor Royce when the media gets a hold of unofficially sanctioned open-air drug market in a major American city, Jesus Christ, that is a scandal. But the city's top cops run solid cover, saying they had to sit on the raids to protect a wiretap case. That defense is extra ironic, though, given that Bodie was caught up in the wiretap and got out of prison by claiming entrapment. Still, it doesn't stop the 2 councilmen we followed throughout the season, Tommy Littlefinger and Tony Gray, from using Hamsterdam as a launching pad for their mayoral elections, bookending the 3rd season. When we pick up again in the 4th, we see Rawls really get to play politics with the department. First, he has to deal with Lester Freamon, the second coolest character on The Wire. And I gotta take a second to talk about Lester's big brain moves. Lester followed Stringer Bell's drug money, and it led to developer Andy Krawcheck and Senator Clay Davis. But see, Lester is shrewd. He waits until a month before the primary election to drop a batch of subpoenas, knowing Mayor Royce and City Hall can't give them the Colvin without creating a scandal. That shit's brilliant. Unironically, 200 IQ play, Lester. Only problem is, Rawls has a 250 IQ play up his sleeve, and his name is Lieutenant Marimo. Apparently, he's named after an editor at the Baltimore Sun that David Simon hated, and I think that's hilarious. Makes sense given he's toxic and hostile, a man who heaves off talent with great force, to borrow from Landsman, yet also thinks he's the shit and completely oblivious to how cynically Rawls is using him. And honestly, this explains a bit about his interactions with Herc.
We had this as a stash house? According to the wiretap. How long ago? They move him around, you know.
Even Herc is shocked at Marimo's incompetence. Anyway, Rawls sicks Marimo on the major crimes, nuking Lester's subpoenas and the Marlowe wiretaps in one go. Lester is ready to go down swinging, and Rawls just...
Are your disciples as keen for the cross?
perfect. And just when he has Lester dead to rights, we get more.
I respect the effort.
I think this is genuine. He understands where Lester is coming from and respects the strategy. This is a moment where the two of them get to lay all their cards on the table and be completely honest with each other, something that doesn't happen too often. And that respect plays out when he not only gives Lester a new home in Homicide, but then honors Daniel's request to send Kima there as well.
Let me see who I don't love no more.
And the newly made homicide detective Shakima Greggs gets her unwanted moment in the sun. See, in The Wire and in real life, I'm sure, Baltimore has many a homicide, and every now and then, one of those victims just so happens to be a key witness in a drug investigation. And when this happens, Tommy Littlefinger uses it as political ammunition mid-debate, and I just love Rawls' reaction.
No more surprises, huh?
That's him saying, shit, It leaked. It's gonna get real interesting now. And boy, does it. Mayor Royce tells Burrell to slow the case down, so Burrell decides to transfer Kima onto the case. Landsman, who was unhappy with this, and who was Valchek's original source, went to him again, and Valchek again went to Littlefinger, and he goes to Tony Gray, and again it becomes a whole thing. And sure, in a different video, I could take some time to talk about how cynically people's lives and deaths get used as hit pieces, or even do the opposite, analyze how smart Norman's play was, but instead I'll note that Rawls uses Burrell's blunder to his own advantage, seeking to maneuver past Burrell and set himself up with Royce should he get reelected.
The transferring of people off a case?
What a guy. He knows the exacerbated reaction was subtle enough that Burrell would not notice, but Royce and Parker would. Royce then tells Rawls to clean it up and be rewarded, so Rawls holds a bullshit press conference, saying it was all a miscommunication.
Sources inside the department were saying...
I'm inside the department and I'm telling you that's not true.
This act by Burrell proved to be the final nail in the coffin for Mayor Royce, just not directly. One of his most important grassroots organizers, Odell Watkins of the House of Delegates, breaks off ties with Royce in an admittedly hilarious scene.
Delegate Watkins! Wait, sir!
Amidst this chaos at City Hall, Lieutenant Hoskins of the mayor's security detail steps out to make a call.
Deputy Rawls, please.
And thus, Rawls really gets to play some politics. First, he finds Tommy Littlefinger on the street as he's canvassing, and he gives him the news personally.
Watkins is breaking with the mayor.
Then, when Kima and Norris want to interview a suspect the day before Election Day, Rawls details them to poll-watching duty. He makes the valid political points, but is also self-aware enough to recognize the cynicism.
American democracy. Let's show those third world fucks how it's done.
Anyway, Watkins does eventually roll with Tommy Littlefinger, who wins the election. And when he's still mayor-elect, he's serious about police reform, taking special note when Daniels gives his ComStat presentation and disliking his time spent on the street. And Rawls takes note of this. He's a room reader, and he sees which way the wind is blowing, and thus he says this to Tommy Littlefinger.
I've been fighting this bullshit for years. The only way to go is high-end enforcement. You pick the targets, it'll make a dent out there. Problem is, I do what I'm told.
My God, Rawls gets a 3 for 1, shitting on his superiors for doing their job poorly while saying he's both loyal enough to follow those orders and smart enough to know they're unhelpful. Telling people what they want to hear, hiding your true power level, using spies, spreading dissent, maneuvering around present allies. No wonder Littlefinger was so good at Game of Thrones. He learned from Rawls. Anyway, for reasons beyond the scope of this video, the desired reforms do not come to fruition, and Rawls does eventually become police commissioner, but only transitionally, with Daniels on deck beside him. And the first thing Commissioner Rawls has to deal with is the Red Ribbon serial killer, also known as McNulty and Lester's fake serial killer storyline from season 5, which is, for the most part, also outside the scope of this video. But I'll bookend by saying that Rawls does help cover everything up, and in exchange, he becomes head of the Maryland State Police in the series finale. For a final couple of times, rubs up against the yin to his yang, McNulty.
You're not killing them yourself, McNulty. At least assure me of that.
8 pages ago, I initially wrote that Rawls is what happens when McNulty becomes corrupt. And then I realized, wait no, McNulty is also corrupt. I mean, there's obviously the fake serial killer stuff, but I'm being more general than that. Rawls' character and story arc is one of standard corruption. Rawls wants power. He's described by Colonel Forrester as
ruthless the fuckers we have in this department.
McNulty is a different kind of corrupt. He doesn't care about power. He wants the glory. He doesn't care about climbing the ladder or making rank. He just wants to catch bad guys.
I'm a murder police. I'm here about the bodies.
But McNulty doesn't do this to make the world a better place. He does it because he wants to. He doesn't go after Avon Barksdale because he's murdering people around Baltimore. He uses those murders as justification to go after Avon himself and feed his own ego. He literally says so right here.
Avon Barksdale was just a way for me to show everyone how smart I was and how fucked up the department is, that's all.
I'm no psychologist or therapist or anything, so take this all with a grain of salt, but I think it's pretty safe to say that McNulty is a narcissist. He has no sense of loyalty, except to the job he's doing, whether that's a murder case or a drug investigation. The concept of cultivating allies or building a like-minded coalition largely eludes him. He's a self-destructive lone wolf, and for him, his current allies are disposable and only as useful as long as they listen to what he says. I mean, damn, he can't even give his friends credit when it's due.
I think good, right, Jimmy?
Look, I gotta go.
With all this said, it makes McNulty something of an anti-politician. He hates the system and those who work to climb its ranks for their own personal benefit, and he even likes it when people fuck over the system.
It's got a point.
Look at him, so proud of Bodhi, and it even comes up again later.
Smart kiddo. I loved it.
On the job, though, McNulty has this belligerence that turns people away at first. I imagine it comes from some kind of self-righteousness, the idea that his personal goals of catching criminals carries more moral weight than someone like Rawls just trying to make rank. And in some respects he's not wrong, but he goes about achieving his goals in a way devoid of empathy. I think there's a really telling small moment at the end of Season 1. As Daniels and McNulty wait to follow D'Angelo, they consider the implications of Wallace's being murdered. Or should I say McNulty does.
With Wallace gone, that's Stringer out of the box.
This line honestly caught me off guard, and Daniels too. McNulty's complete disregard for Wallace's life. But it's very consistent. He only cared about Wallace to the extent he could pin Stringer Bell in the case, which is the only priority. From his perspective, if he's willing to double-cross Perlman and Daniels, why would he give a shit about some kid from the projects? So this is McNulty, a wrecking ball, a remorseless agent of chaos who pulls strings to get people to do what he wants. Consequences be damned. Bunk put it perfectly when he said,
You're no good for people, man. Everybody around you. Christ.
That's just McNulty's nature, right? Well, not exactly. See, McNulty acknowledges the consequences of his actions. He's smart enough to be self-aware in a way that is analogous to Rawls.
This thing with Lester, I feel like shit about it.
Well, you get used to it.
His single line adds so much depth, basically saying that McNulty recognizes the collateral damage of his actions and does feel remorse, but that remorse is not enough to stop him from pursuing his goals. For him, it's something he builds a tolerance to, like he does alcohol. The more damage he causes on the regular, the more severe the consequences have to be in order for him to really feel something. And this is never more evident than when Kima gets shot. This is McNulty at his lowest point, as he blames himself for Kima's shooting, and I hate to be repetitious, but that adds so much nuance to his character. It's so interesting to watch an arrogant character who says, when things go right, it's because of me, but when things go wrong, it's because of me. I can't quite articulate why, but I feel like it adds some credibility for me, especially since it lasts. There's nearly a full episode between the hospital scenes with Rawls and Daniels. We already talked about the conversation with Rawls, and I think hearing those supportive words, at least by Rawls standards, helped pick him up off the ground, but he doesn't get very far. He spends the rest of the episode in his Jameson, sulking in self-pity until the start of the next episode, when he talks to Daniels. I played a clip from this scene earlier, and I want to go deeper into it now. McNulty immediately asks Daniels about Kima, someone he truly cares for, but can't bring himself to go see yet. He's not ready to face the literal personification of his guilt. And Daniels, being Daniels, says, fine, then get back to work. At which point McNulty admits the ego-driven motivation behind his quote-unquote crusade. And Daniels basically says, yeah, Stevie Wonder could see that, but it doesn't matter because...
In this case, it means something now.
And he's right. McNulty moved mountains within the BPD to get the detail up and running, a detail he and he alone wanted. And in classic fashion, when McNulty personally experiences the dominoes he sets in motion, he decides it wasn't worth it. Daniels is the one to point out that it doesn't matter. The case is bigger than what he wanted. Even if the road he took led him to an undesired outcome, he has to see it through to the end. A nice thematic tie-in for the serial killer plotline. And the 1-2 reality check from Rawls and Daniels seems to get McNulty's head on straight. And the next time we see him, he's with Bunk, Daniels, and Lester as they plan their next steps. It's at this point they figure Avon is icing anyone who can be used against him, and they suddenly remember Wallace. Because this show is so incredibly dense, Wallace is dead by the end of the episode and everyone knows it, meaning McNulty was hours away from having Stringer in prison along with Avon, and that's something he never lets go. And it's at this point his priorities begin to change. Come season 3, it's no longer about showing off, it's about revenge. Stringer was the one that got away, and McNulty will be damned if he lets it happen twice. At this point in the story, about midway through season 3, McNulty's ego is Heisenberg-sized. Thankfully, his outlet of alcohol and chasing drug gangs is much healthier for society than cooking meth and murdering folks. There's this great scene where McNulty rants to Lester about how good they are at his job, and the first thing I want to say is how funny it is that co-creator Ed Burns gives himself a shout-out.
Don Warden, Ed Burns, Gary Child.
Also, come on McNulty, give the bunk some love. Like I said, his rant here is all about how there are only 5 other cops who can do the job he and Lester do, completely ignoring Prez, who is as good at the paper trail as McNulty is on the street. But in the process of just speaking facts, he proceeds to shit on literally everyone else in the department, stepping on other people to prop himself up, just like Rawls. In this moment, however, his mental house of cards begins to come down. Lester listens to his rant and asks him what he expects. Lester Freeman's got that wisdom, and he uses it to call out McNulty's fantasies and delusions of superiority. He tells him the job will not make him whole, that cases end, and he will never have his desired moment in the sun. And just look at McNulty here. These words cut to the bone, and he knows there's nothing he can say because Lester is right. After all, in the first half of season 2, we saw McNulty when he's not working a case. And I'll just let Bunk take this one.
He's a picture postcard of a drunken, self-destructive fuck-up.
Lester knows it too, and tells McNulty to get a life by dropping one of the best lines in the show.
It's the shit that happens while you're waiting for moments that never come.
McNulty does not want to hear that the job will not make him whole, that his cases will end, but he needs to, especially when Stringer gets revenge murdered by Brother Muzone and Omar. At the crime scene, McNulty says this.
On the wire, I caught him. He doesn't fucking know it.
This guy got but he's not satisfied. He wanted Stringer to know it was him, and to feel that gratification. Ironically, when he tries to get that satisfaction by showing Avon it was Stringer who ratted him out, he unknowingly put Avon's mind at ease over putting Brother Muzone on Stringer. And when they search Stringer's apartment, McNulty is bewildered at the sight.
Who the fuck was I chasing?
As I analyzed for this video, I came to the conclusion that McNulty's growth can be directly attributed to his self-awareness bursting through, and Stringer's death was the catalyst. In this moment, McNulty feels and understands the truth in Lester's words, so he goes to Beatty. We saw them develop a nice dynamic in season 2, with McNulty putting on a much more courteous front and Beatty giving him a lot of side-eye. There's this great scene when they're working together on the Greek investigation. He drops off Beatty at her house, looks around, and decides to leave, an act I read as a moment of self-awareness from him. He likes Beatty, but he knows he's a ball of chaos, and decides not to impose his alcoholic, womanizing self onto her in her life. It takes another season, but McNulty finally feels ready to talk to Beatty. He's clearly not comfortable talking about his feelings and stumbles his way through some metaphors, but he tries to explain that his police work brings out the worst in him, and he wants to live a life that is fulfilling and brings out his best. Beatty, who already liked McNulty back in season 2, can tell he's genuine and accepts him into her life. At season's end, he leaves the Major Crimes Unit and returns to walking his beat in the Western. And that's where we see him at the start of season 4. He's just patrolling, in a very successful relationship with Beatty, off the Jameson. He's in a good place. He's happy. And that's the end to a very successful character arc. A self-destructive yet decent man consumed with his police work gains some perspective and takes a step back to a happy life. What a nice ending, right? Right? Well, no. But for the purposes of this narrative, we'll pretend like it is and just move on. Look at the timestamp already. So thus far, we've looked at 2 very different motivations for corruption, power and glory, and how these 2 motivations influence Rawls and McNulty throughout the series. But what happens when you have a character who steps into the corrupt waters, but then backs out? Well, you end up with Lieutenant Daniels. See, long before Lieutenant Daniels' first name was Lieutenant, he was just Daniels, a police officer in the Eastern District, and he started off a dirty cop. We're never told explicitly what he did, but we are shown a little binder that Burrell and later Nerisse threatens him with. And long before then, McNulty gets told by Fitz, his FBI buddy, that the feds did a 2-month asset investigation and that Daniels has
got a couple $100,000 more in liquid assets than any police lieutenant should ever have.
Putting these context clues together, I think it's safe to assume that he was skimming money off the top of drug raids, an idea further supported by his reaction to Herc and Carr when he suspects them of doing the same thing.
This doesn't happen.
But Daniels put those days behind him, and when we meet him in the first season, he's a no-bullshit boss. He rolls with Burrell and does what he says, and early on he fights with McNulty when he tries to do his thing. One thing I noticed for the first time was that McNulty and Daniels first hear about each other in negative ways. To Daniels, Burrell says this.
Well, he's the one who mouthed off to the judge in the first place.
To McNulty, Bunk says this.
He's a company man. You know, a prospect.
As a result, there's an undercurrent of distrust and animosity right off the bat. And as Bunk tells McNulty, Daniels is trying to climb the ladder. He's on the short list for major, but as you watch the first season, you see McNulty gradually wear Daniels down. Sure, he gives McNulty a hard time in the pilot episode, and is ready to have a serious talk with him before Prez shoots a wall. Yes, that actually happened. But 10 episodes later, he's the one telling McNulty to get back to work. That didn't happen overnight, in part because from the very beginning, Daniels wanted to do the case well. Sure, he didn't want the case to begin with, but now that he's got it, a part of him says, well shit, I might as well do it how it needs to be done. One of the first things he does is ask Burrell for more manpower, and he gets sent poking Mahone. 2 jaded, uninterested, I'm just here until I get pension-ass cops. Daniels knows the message. Get in and out. Don't dig in. And he not only complains about this to Perlman, but tries to get her to push her bosses to push his bosses to send better cops. How very McNulty of him. But Daniels suppresses this desire to do the actual case, at least for a time, and McNulty sees it.
Daniels will come round.
When the two of them constantly butt heads, McNulty's belligerence turns off Daniels at first, but he gradually comes around. And on my last rewatch, I think I found the turning point. Brandon's murder. Early on in the first season, Omar robs the Barksdales with his boyfriend Brandon and their partner in crime, John Bailey. Over the next few episodes, Bailey is murdered in retaliation, and Brandon is kidnapped and tortured to death as the Barksdale boys try to get Omar's location. The next morning, they dump his body in the low-rises to send a message, and it spurns Omar to cooperate with the case. So how does this relate to Daniels? Well, at this point, Daniels is at something of an impasse. Earlier, they tried raids that got nowhere, so Judge Phelan is not yet satisfied with the casework. At this point, they get a wiretap up on payphones, and the morning after Brandon's murder, they see the literal game of telephone played by Wallace, D'Angelo, and Stringer. Later in the episode, when Omar starts talking about Brandon, Lester makes the connection and shows McNulty, just as Daniels walks through the door. So naturally, McNulty does McNulty things.
On you.
First, he puts Brandon's murder on Daniels. Is this fair? No. But McNulty's already pissed at Daniels for bending to Rawls, and he's trying to provoke him. By putting his death on Daniels, McNulty grabs his attention and explains how, if surveillance was up on the payphones that Tuesday night, they would have caught them.
It's all here on the pen register. This one calling that one calling back.
And to close, McNulty calls him out.
In this case, we're never where we need to be.
This is brilliant structure by McNulty. Make an unfair, provocative statement, call out what happened, and Daniels himself refuse to elaborate, leave. In response to this, Daniels takes a hard look at the notepad and an even longer look at Brandon's picture. At this point, he fights with Rawls to keep the case going. He calls out Rawls for his impatience and explains how waiting to charge D'Angelo for murders he did not commit comes at no cost to him or the case, and brilliantly ends with the mic drop saying that if they nuke the case for nothing,
there isn't going to be a thing that you or me or Rawls here is going to be able to say to that goddamn judge.
The episode ends with Daniels taking a long, hard look at Brandon's picture. This is one of those moments where writing plus directing plus acting equals on-screen internal monologue. You can almost hear Daniels telling himself, these people gotta fall, no matter what. And from this point on, his ambition dies. His sole priority becomes the job, actually following through on the case and bringing down the Barksdale organization, wherever it may lead. And throughout the back half of the season, there are moments where he reflexively pushes back, but like Lester says,
he's wrestling with the angels on this one.
Not long after this, the wiretap picks up Little Man handing 20 to someone named Day. Keen viewers may recognize the name as Day, a driver Daniels met at a fundraiser, even before he's busted with the 20,000 cash. So naturally, when Daniels arrives, he trolls him a little bit.
You get the money cracking cribs or what?
They plan to seize the money under civil forfeiture when the Angel of Death walks in, Major Reed. It's here that Burrell tells Daniels to give him back the money and to shut down the case. Daniels is shocked, explaining they did nothing wrong, but Burrell reminds him of his golden rule.
No surprises.
So they give Day back his money, pissing everyone off, except Carver, who is conspicuously absent. Daniels leaves without saying anything, so McNulty confronts him. Daniels tells him the job will not save him, this time talking about his career, and that Burrell is shutting down the case, citing the chain of command. McNulty calls out the bullshit chain of command.
Well, did you tell your major about the senator's driver? Did you tell the colonel?
And asks him an unwanted question.
You say you got the deputy's ear. What the fuck's he got on you?
I love this moment. We know that Daniels is dirty and that McNulty knows, but Daniels doesn't know that he knows. So he goes home and, like any happily married man, decompresses with his wife, Marla, in a thematically resonant conversation. He tells her Burrell saw this coming and drops one of the greatest lines in a show full of them.
You follow the drugs, you get a drug case. You start following the money, you don't know where you're going.
It emphasizes how corrupt everyone is. Top brass knows politicians have monetary relationships with drug gangs, so the unwritten rule is not to follow the money, and Daniels is currently annihilating that rule. He also shows how much McNulty is getting under his skin.
He actually asked me that.
She asks him what he said in response, and he knows he can't say anything. Not even because McNulty knows he's corrupt, but because he doesn't want to lie to him, which is something that probably frustrates him as much as anything. Not long after this, Kima goes undercover and gets shot. Now, I mentioned this twice before, so I'll go for even less the third time around, but I previously said it was the one moment that the entire department worked to the same goal, finding Kima's shooters. Unfortunately, that doesn't last long. Burrell weaponizes the shooting to order citywide raids on all available drug targets, knowing it will wreck the wiretap, and directs some doublespeak towards Daniels.
The commissioner wants to send a message, Lieutenant. You make sure you and your people do everything possible to see that it is heard.
Unfortunately for Burrell, that won't stop Daniels because he can't hear, so he tells the detail.
We're gonna hold back on the main stash.
Great foreshadowing here, Carve snapping to attention as he's later outed as Burrell's little bird. Anyway, Daniels tries his luck with the Angels, and it does not go as planned.
Stop bullshitting me!
Major Reed comes to the basement and calmly tells Daniels to stop bullshitting him, but does it in a way that the rest of the detail knows what's up. After the raids, Daniels has to send some people back, and it turns into a personnel chess match. Burrell, detached from the inner workings of the detail, tells Daniels to keep Lester and Prez as a joke, oblivious to their work on the paper trail. And I just love Daniels' reaction. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. And before season's end, Daniels gets to wrestle with an archangel, Clay Davis. It's impossible to make a video about corruption in The Wire and not talk about Clay Davis. The guy is awesome in the worst possible way. He's so brazenly slimy and corrupt, and he loves it. And despite everything his character stands for, I love it. And it's a joy to watch. I mean, in the 5th season, he gets put on trial for corruption. And he argues his case by admitting to his crimes and saying they will continue. He lies through his teeth to the jury about corruption I know he did, and I believe him. Dude maxed out charisma and speech. But this is about Daniels, not Clay Davis, so I have to lock in here. In this scene, we see all the friction Daniels had with McNulty really pay off. Clay Davis says he's not up to anything illegal, but doesn't really put that much effort into convincing Daniels.
I'm not involved in drugs, Lieutenant.
They specifically talk about Clay Davis's driver. What's his name again?
Mr. Price. Damien.
Diddy.
God, I love Daniels. Clay Davis tries to explain that no, actually, Day did not get the money from Little Man. He got it earlier, and he even filed an amended finance report, implying that, after the car stop, he went into his reports and said, actually, psych, we need to add $20,000 to this one. Anyway, it's at this point that things heat up. Burrell tries to get Daniels to say that he shouldn't have had any reason to stop Day in the first place. And even with pressure from Clay Davis, Daniels refuses to budge, saying there was PC for the car stop, they were just doing their job. But even that was too much for Clay Davis.
Irv, will you explain to this motherfucker just what the fuck it is he's doing here?
The code switch here cracks me up every time. Clay Davis crashes out to Daniels, and then he just leaves, without saying another word. What a guy. This is the moment where the ambitious, ass-kissing up the chain of command Daniels fully exits the room. He knows he did nothing wrong, and also knows that the job is not going to save him, and given the shit he stirred up, he's buried anyway, so why would he debase himself? And lest you think I'm exaggerating, he gets a final showdown with Burrell. Burrell demands the arrest of Avon, the original request, and the only thing that matters to him, and tells them to wrap up the case. Daniels is pissed, saying that the money is part of the case. It's at this point that Burrell threatens Daniels, telling him to bring in Avon or he's done, and Daniels calls his bluff. Daniels knows that if he's exposed, Burrell won't be able to control the reaction. Questions will be asked, especially since he held it back for such a long time, and given the fallout, Daniels will likely rope in Clay Davis and his driver. Burrell knows that, of course, but what he doesn't expect is Daniels to know it too. Ultimately, Daniels agrees to arrest Avon on half a case, but demands to keep the case going with active wires. He then does a half-assed salute, what a power move, and walks out. And to complete his McNultification, Daniels rolls with McNulty when he suggests maneuvering past Burrell and taking the case directly to the FBI. Feds agreed to the case, but only because of Clay Davis, meaning they would turn Avon and Stringer into cooperators. So Daniels and his detail walk out. In doing so, however, McNulty pisses them off so much, they tip off Burrell. And the last we see of Daniels for the season, he runs into newly made Major Cantrell, indicating that he did not, in fact, get the promotion. Instead, Daniels' top-tier police work earns him a spot in evidence control, mirroring McNulty's time on the boat. Unlike McNulty, however, Daniels is much more at peace, saying this to Bunk.
Will you give him my love?
Who?
Bird.
And after talking with Marla, Daniels decides he's going to use his law degree and retire from the department. He has his papers in. He's got 1 foot out the door. He's right there. Instead, Burrell asks him to run Valchek's detail. He doesn't want the case and is ready to leave, putting Burrell on the back foot and forcing him to bargain. And Daniels, proving again he's smarter than Burrell, quickly realizes that he was requested by name, in part because Daniels backed Perez in Season 1.
Son-in-law can't say enough in your favor. And of course you did him a good turn last year, right?
So Daniels is now in a position to have more autonomy while doing the same kind of investigative work, and when it's over, retire with a higher pension and keep a major case squad. He agrees to these terms, and when picking his own people, picks the Season 1 cast. And I commend the show for making the gangs all back together a gradual process. This time around, Daniels plays their game, but he does so on his terms. As the case begins to connect to McNulty's 14 bodies, Rawls tries to get Daniels to add them onto his case, but Daniels refuses, knowing taking them on and coming up short is a bad look. This pisses off Bunk and Lester, who are stuck with the case, so Lester convinces Daniels to take it on anyway.
But you let it pass. You gotta ask yourself how you want to live your day-to-day.
Like McNulty back in Season 1, he moralizes it for Daniels, but unlike McNulty, it's a valid call-out. Daniels takes it to heart and agrees to take the murders from Rawls in exchange for more autonomy. He then uses said autonomy to bring McNulty into the fold, and it really wasn't that difficult. All he had to do was remind Rawls of his clearance rate. Throughout the season, it's great to see Daniels, someone we know is smart and good at his job, really get to throw his weight around. And because nothing he's doing is implicating the city or state government, he gets away with it, to an extent. Valchek is unhappy with the case's progress.
This is about Frank Sabatka.
And decides to rope in the FBI. As they're brought up to speed, one Agent Kutrius gets tipped off on the wiretaps into the Greeks. I fucking love this. See, the Greeks are awesome. They're international high crime, operating on such a large scale that losing $15 million is meaningless. Throughout the season, we learn they move from coast to coast, have dozens of bodies around the US, deal internationally in prostitution, and are well-connected passport collectors with a contact in the FBI. Specifically, they're listed as a confidential source, and given Agent Kutrius is in DC and we saw the Greeks give up their Colombian competition, to the tune of $500 million by the way, it's clear his career has benefited from this relationship, and he's willing to look the other way to keep his source. This, combined with their overall competence, allows the Greeks to stay a step ahead. Kinda difficult to catch someone if you don't know what they look like. They manage to flee, but do so without Surya, who gives Daniels the clearances on the 14 murders. So in the end, he gets the job done and brings the case home, keeps the major case squad, and eventually even gets his promotions. But it's made clear he doesn't solve the problem. And that, my friends, is the main theme of the show. That seems about as good a spot as any to wrap this up. Believe me, I could go on. I mean, I'm doing a whole video about corruption, and I only gave Clay Davis a paragraph, glossed over everything to do with Tommy Littlefinger, didn't finish Daniels or McNulty's character arcs, and mentioned Frank Sabatka only once. I'm really just scratching the surface on this one theme, of which there are many in The Wire. But still, I'm 24 pages into the script, so it seems like a solid endpoint. Shit. The easy part is over for me. Now I actually have to figure out how to make this video. Once I do, I will post it. And hopefully you'll enjoy it so much you're still listening to me ramble. If you are, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I can't tell you when, but I promise there will be more where this came from.